Hello viewers, and welcome back to our channel. The world has seen numerous significant events unfold recently, and today we're diving deep into a topic causing considerable buzz and concern, particularly for our Canadian audience. For many years, entering the United States was almost second nature for Canadians. Think about it. No complex visa procedures, no major administrative headaches. It was largely characterized by open roads and generally amiable interactions at the border. The convenience fostered a strong sense of ease and trust between the neighboring nations. However, as we look towards the year 2025 and beyond, there's a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Something feels distinctly different. We're hearing more about fingerprints being required at the border, increased instances of mobile phones being searched, longer questioning periods by border officials, and an overall change in demeanor, what some describe as colder looks. That implicit, almost automatic trust that Canadians once took for granted seems to be eroding, slipping away gradually. What's perhaps most surprising is that a large number of Canadians might not even be fully aware of the extent of these changes yet. Is this simply a tightening of security protocols, a necessary response to global events? Or could it be interpreted as a more subtle signal, a quiet indication that Canadians are perhaps not as unconditionally welcome as they once believed? The implications are significant, potentially altering travel habits and perceptions for years to come. Stick with us as we explore these developments, because what is currently happening at the US-Canada border might permanently change the way you approach cross-border travel. We'll delve into the specifics, examine the contributing factors, and discuss the potential consequences. Remember, we'll be drawing conclusions at the end of this video, so make sure to stay tuned. Before we proceed, if you find this information valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the like button. Your support is incredibly important for our channel's growth and helps us continue bringing you important updates like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our diverse audience across the globe. The established convention of Canadians staying in the US for extended periods, specifically up to 6 months without needing extensive paperwork or facing significant obstacles, has undergone a dramatic transformation. This ease of travel was particularly beneficial for Canadian snowbirds seeking warmer climates during winter months. For decades, this relatively uncomplicated process was a hallmark of the US-Canada relationship. Entering the US required minimal fuss. Often, just showing a passport and answering a few standard questions was sufficient. However, the landscape shifted significantly around 2025. The previous straightforward approach has been replaced by a more complex and regulated system. The regulations introduced now impose a much shorter default stay limit for Canadians, just 30 days. To stay longer, Canadians must now proactively register with US immigration authorities through an online system before their intended stay. This isn't merely a bureaucratic tweak, it represents a fundamental change in policy. This policy adjustment is framed as part of a broader initiative by US authorities to more accurately track long-term visitors within the country. While the objective might be enhanced monitoring, the practical effect is a significant alteration to the travel freedom Canadians previously enjoyed. A major issue arising from this change is the lack of widespread awareness among the Canadian population. Many Canadians, accustomed to the old rules, may not realize that this new 30-day restriction exists or understand the requirement for advance online registration. This knowledge gap is causing considerable confusion and potential problems for travelers. Immigration lawyers are reporting a substantial increase in inquiries and cases related to this confusion, indicating the real-world impact of the policy shift. Organizations representing Canadian snowbirds are actively lobbying for exemptions or modifications to the rule, highlighting the disruption it causes to long-established travel patterns. Anecdotal evidence is already emerging, with travelers reporting receiving warnings or encountering difficulties at the border due to the new stay limitations. Many are realizing, perhaps too late, that they can no longer assume the ability to stay for extended periods without navigating the new registration process and facing potential complications if they fail to comply. The impact is not just anecdotal, it's reflected in official data. Statistics Canada reported a notable decline, nearly 32%, in vehicle re-entries from the US in March compared to the previous year, suggesting the new rules are deterring or complicating travel. This change goes beyond simply filling out a form. It signifies a deeper shift in how Canadians are perceived and processed at the U.S. border. What once felt like a fluid, almost effortless experience, a simple crossing between friendly neighbors, now carries an undercurrent of scrutiny, feeling more like an assessment or a test. Are Canadians truly welcome, or merely tolerated under stricter conditions? This subtle but significant alteration is prompting many to reconsider their travel plans and question the nature of the border relationship itself. When did this familiar border start feeling less like home and more like a checkpoint requiring justification? Please make sure to watch this video until the end, as we'll be summarizing the key takeaways and offering our conclusions on this evolving situation. The shift extends beyond entry duration. Personal privacy at the border is also undergoing a significant change. It used to be that crossing into the U.S. was a relatively simple affair. You'd present your passport, perhaps answer a question or two about your trip's purpose and duration, and typically, you'd be on your way without much intrusion. The process felt routine and generally respected personal boundaries. However, in the current climate, around 2025, the procedures have taken a decidedly more invasive turn. Canadians arriving at the U.S. border are increasingly finding themselves asked to hand over personal electronic devices. This isn't limited to just phones. Laptops, tablets, and other digital devices are also subject to inspection. What's crucial to understand is that U.S. border agents possess the legal authority to search through the contents of these devices without needing a warrant. This authority is broad, allowing them to scroll through text messages, examine photos and videos, check browser history, and even inspect social media accounts logged into on the device. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this is that travelers generally have no legal right to refuse such a search at the border. Refusal can lead to denial of entry or other complications. This policy of warrantless device searches has understandably raised serious privacy concerns among Canadians and civil liberties groups. The situation became even more charged after reports surfaced showing Canadians being flagged, subjected to secondary screening, or even denied entry based on content found on their devices. This content could range from personal opinions expressed in messages or social media posts to political views inferred from browsing history. Alarmingly, even seemingly harmless items like old memes or jokes shared years ago could potentially be misinterpreted or used as grounds for suspicion by border officials. The lack of transparency surrounding these searches adds another layer of anxiety. Travelers are often not told why their devices are being searched or what specific information agents are looking for. There's no clear process for understanding the criteria used for selection or the conclusions drawn from the searched data. The most unsettling part is the ambiguity and the potential for misinterpretation. Personal data, which individuals rightfully consider private, is now potentially exposed to scrutiny without clear cause or explanation. The fear this generates is tangible. The Canadian government itself has acknowledged this reality and started issuing warnings to its citizens traveling to the U.S., advising them to expect these digital searches. They highlight that these searches can occur without clear cause and often without any requirement for border agents to provide an explanation for their actions. It's not a targeted process based on specific intelligence in most cases. Rather, it appears to be a broad, and to many, invasive practice. What was once a quick and easy border crossing now feels, for some, like an open invitation for authorities to delve deep into their digital lives. There are no clear boundaries defined for these searches, and travelers have little way of knowing if, when, or how the information gathered might be used against them in the future. This represents a level of scrutiny that many Canadians never anticipated when crossing into the U.S., transforming the perception of the border from a simple transit point into something potentially resembling an interrogation, where personal digital information is no longer truly private. The concerns surrounding border crossings in 2025 weren't limited to government warnings or individual traveler experiences. The academic community also voiced significant apprehension. It wasn't just the Canadian government raising alarms about the changing dynamics at the U.S. border. One of Canada's most respected and influential academic institutions weighed in, adding a significant voice to the growing unease. The Canadian Association of University Teachers, commonly known as CAUT, which represents a vast body of over 72,000 professors, researchers, librarians, and other academic professionals across the country, took the unusual step of issuing a travel advisory concerning the United States. This wasn't a general or vague statement. It was a specific and rare warning directed at its members, urging them to reconsider travel to the U.S. for professional purposes, such as attending conferences or collaborating on research. The advisory highlighted particular risks for certain groups within their membership. It strongly cautioned faculty members who were transgender, racialized, politically outspoken, or belonged to any other marginalized group that might face discriminatory treatment or heightened scrutiny under current U.S. policies or prevailing social climates in certain regions. The rationale behind this extraordinary warning stemmed from what CAUT identified as a disturbing trend. They cited increasing reports of harassment, invasive questioning, and unexplained detentions experienced by academics at the U.S. border. These incidents weren't isolated, but appeared to be part of a pattern targeting individuals from these specific demographic groups. The CAUT advisory wasn't merely about logistical travel anxieties. It was fundamentally about the safety, dignity, and protection of its members. The potential for discriminatory treatment or unwarranted intrusion was deemed significant enough to warrant a formal caution. As a practical measure following the advisory, many universities across Canada began reviewing and updating their own travel protocols for faculty and staff undertaking trips to the U.S. Legal departments within these institutions stepped in to provide guidance, advising academics on potential risks and best practices, such as data security on electronic devices. Recommendations included wiping phones and laptops of sensitive personal or research data before traveling, limiting the amount of personal information carried, and being prepared for potential flagging or secondary screening at the border. The advisory explicitly noted that individuals might be flagged not based on any wrongdoing or suspicious items they carried, but simply because of who they are, their identity, ethnicity, or perceived political leanings. The ripple effect was noticeable. Conferences and academic events traditionally held in major U.S. hubs like Boston, Chicago, or New York, which were once routine destinations for Canadian academics, started seeing quieter participation from Canadian institutions or faced questions about relocation. Academics and university departments began carefully weighing the necessity of travel against the potential risks outlined by CAUT and reported by colleagues. The fact that a major body like CAUT, representing the intellectual core of the nation, felt compelled to issue such a warning speaks volumes. It signifies that the changes at the border were perceived as going beyond standard security measures and potentially infringing on academic freedom and personal safety. This wasn't an isolated issue affecting only tourists or casual visitors. It was a growing pattern that had demonstrably left many in the academic world feeling unsafe, vulnerable, and reconsidering their engagement with U.S.-based activities. It highlighted that the very essence of academic exchange, historically a cornerstone of the robust cross-border relationship between Canada and the U.S., was potentially being undermined by the prevailing atmosphere and practices at the border. Sometimes, the most significant indicators of a shift aren't found in loud pronouncements or official policy changes, but in subtle, quiet trends that ripple beneath the surface. These are the shifts that happen gradually, often behind the scenes, without major headlines. In the period around 2025, a notable trend emerged. Canadians began, almost imperceptibly, to pull back from traveling to the U.S. This wasn't a coordinated boycott or an organized protest, but rather a slow, quiet retreat. A collective hesitation that started making economic waves in U.S. border towns and traditional tourist destinations heavily reliant on Canadian visitors. This silent pullback wasn't just a feeling. It was backed by data. In early 2025, statistics indicated a significant 23% decline in Canadian visits to the United States compared to the previous year. This translated into fewer cars crossing the border, a noticeable drop in hotel bookings by Canadians, and a general decrease in the number of Canadians showing up for weekend getaways, shopping trips, or longer vacations. Businesses located in border towns, particularly in states like Maine and Michigan, as well as other regions historically popular with Canadian tourists, started to feel the pinch. These communities, whose economies often depend heavily on the influx of Canadian dollars, noticed the shift quite clearly. Reports from local business owners began to surface, expressing concern over the decline in Canadian patrons. One motel owner in Old Orchard Beach, a popular Maine destination for Quebecers, articulated the sentiment succinctly, stating they were observing cancellations at a rate unseen in years, and attributing this almost entirely to Canadian travelers pulling back. The underlying reason wasn't necessarily anger or overt political disagreement. Instead, it seemed rooted in a growing sense of unease and uncertainty. Canadians appeared increasingly hesitant about crossing the border, worried about the potential for being searched, delayed, subjected to uncomfortable questioning, or even unexpectedly flagged for reasons unknown. What used to be a simple, almost reflexive day trip for shopping, dining, or sightseeing, across the border now felt fraught with potential hassles, inconveniences, or even genuine risks to their travel plans or personal comfort. The fact that this hesitation was widespread enough to cause a measurable economic impact underscores its significance. It signals that something deeper than just fluctuating exchange rates or changing vacation trends was influencing travel decisions. The implicit, automatic, unquestioned welcome that Canadians had long felt at the U.S. border seemed to be dissolving, replaced by a sense of caution and apprehension. Tour operators and travel agencies located along the busy Quebec and Ontario borders also began reporting this quiet pullback, confirming the trend observed by businesses further south. This shift, though subtle in its daily manifestation for any single traveler, was real and accumulating. It wasn't just about fewer people physically crossing into the U.S. It represented a growing perception that the relationship between the two nations, at least at the border level, was no longer as friendly, open, or predictable as it once was. When ordinary Canadians, families planning vacations, individuals going for a day of shopping, start fundamentally questioning whether they should even make the trip due to concerns about the border experience itself, it reflects more than just a change in travel habits. It serves as a clear sign that the foundational bond of ease and trust between the two countries is experiencing significant strain, potentially altering long-term travel patterns and cross-border interactions. In the year 2025, one of the most deeply troubling shifts observed at the U.S.-Canada border involved the increasing pattern of unequal scrutiny faced by specific groups of Canadian travelers. While border security inherently involves some level of inspection and questioning for everyone, reports began to surface consistently, pointing towards a clear bias in how certain individuals were being treated based primarily on their perceived identity or background. Canadians with names common in Middle Eastern regions, those of South Asian descent, or individuals readily identifiable as Muslim, reported experiencing significantly more invasive searches, longer and more probing interviews, and a generally deeper level of scrutiny compared to other travelers. This disparity wasn't linked to any specific threat intelligence or suspicious behavior on their part, but rather seemed connected to their identity itself. It is crucial to emphasize that this pattern wasn't codified in any official, publicly stated policy. There were no government announcements, press releases, or documented directives mandating such differential treatment. However, the consistency of anecdotal reports from travelers, lawyers, and civil rights organizations suggested an undeniable operational reality at the border. Despite the lack of official policy, this unequal scrutiny was happening consistently enough to raise serious alarms. The experience left many individuals feeling uncomfortable, unwelcome, and singled out for reasons unrelated to their actions or intentions. Border agents were reported to be frequently asking probing questions, delving into personal beliefs, political opinions, religious practices, and travel intentions far beyond the standard inquiries typically associated with border crossings. This scrutiny felt disproportionate and targeted. Many affected travelers were left without any explanation as to why they were subjected to heightened inspection or more intense questioning. They weren't told what specific criteria triggered the extra attention, leaving them feeling confused and powerless. Civil rights groups and legal advocates on both sides of the border began actively raising concerns about this growing trend. They highlighted the potential for racial and religious profiling, and the discriminatory nature of subjecting individuals to more rigorous checks based solely on their background or appearance. Yet, despite these concerns, there remained no clear official channel or process for travelers to address these experiences or seek redress. The lack of transparency and accountability surrounding these practices exacerbated the issue. For many Canadians belonging to these groups, the border experience shifted dramatically. It was no longer just about the practicalities of security checks. It became intertwined with the feeling of being prejudged and treated as inherently suspicious simply because of their name, origin, or faith. It felt like being treated as an outsider, as someone who doesn't automatically belong, even when fully complying with all entry requirements and having no history of wrongdoing. This perceived shift in treatment at the border has had a profound psychological impact. It fosters a sense of fear, anxiety, and discomfort among those who feel targeted. This trend isn't affecting just a small, isolated number of travelers. It's becoming a recognized phenomenon experienced by a growing number of people as the U.S. border transforms into a place where one's appearance or background might significantly influence how they are treated, regardless of their actions. It represents a form of silent, systemic discrimination that, while subtle to outsiders, is deeply unsettling and fundamentally changes the border crossing experience for those who face it. Perhaps one of the most deeply unsettling aspects of the evolving U.S.-Canada border situation around 2025 is the growing perception of permanence associated with being flagged. There's an increasing sense among affected Canadians that once you've been stopped, questioned extensively, or denied entry, you are effectively marked for life within the border security system. This isn't necessarily about being placed on a formal, published watch list or facing explicit ongoing restrictions defined by a clear policy. Instead, it's about a persistent, seemingly invisible record that follows the traveler on subsequent crossings, triggering heightened scrutiny indefinitely. Many Canadians who have encountered issues at the border, even if the initial reason was unclear or eventually resolved, report being treated differently every single time they attempt to cross thereafter. They describe being consistently pulled aside for secondary screening, facing more intensive questioning, and experiencing longer delays, often years after the initial incident. This happens despite having updated paperwork, valid visas, if required, and no subsequent issues or infractions on their record. It creates the impression that the border system possesses a long and unforgiving memory. Once an individual is marked, regardless of the original circumstances or whether any actual wrongdoing occurred, they seem never to be fully in the clear again. Travelers often have no idea what initially caused them to be flagged. Was it a misinterpreted comment during questioning? An association inferred from device data? A mistaken identity? The lack of transparency means the trigger remains unknown. Furthermore, there appears to be no established process to find out what led to the extra scrutiny or any mechanism to formally challenge or clear their name from this invisible record. This absence of recourse leaves individuals feeling trapped in an endless cycle of suspicion and uncertainty every time they approach the border. For those affected, this phenomenon transforms the border crossing experience entirely. What was once a simple, straightforward journey becomes a source of constant anxiety. Each trip carries the weight of potential delays, intrusive questioning, and the unsettling feeling of being under perpetual surveillance. The Canadian government has essentially confirmed the limitations travelers face, warning citizens that U.S. border decisions are typically final, with no formal appeals process available within the U.S. system. They also acknowledge that the reasons behind specific border actions, including flagging or denial of entry, are often not explained to the traveler. This lack of transparency and the apparent permanence of flagging contribute significantly to the unease. It's not just about the inconvenience of more thorough questioning. It's about the psychological burden of feeling perpetually singled out without understanding why or having any way to rectify the situation. For many Canadians caught in this loop, it feels as though the U.S. border has become a place of constant low-level anxiety, a reminder that the system remembers them as a potential issue, even if they've done nothing wrong. This ongoing surveillance and the lack of closure mean that some Canadians are facing a future where every border crossing feels less like a routine passage and more like a renewed interrogation, reinforcing the feeling of being treated as a suspect rather than a welcome visitor. It's a heavy, unsettling reality, and for a growing number, it's becoming the new normal at the U.S. border. As we've explored throughout this discussion, the landscape of the U.S.-Canada border crossing has undeniably shifted. What was once largely perceived as a seamless and friendly passage between two closely allied nations has evolved into an experience marked by increased uncertainty, heightened scrutiny, and tangible discomfort for many Canadians. The changes are multifaceted, ranging from stricter enforcement of stay durations, like the new 30-day default limit requiring advance online registration for longer visits, to more invasive practices such as warrantless searches of personal electronic devices. The trust that underpinned the historically easy crossing appears diminished. Furthermore, the rise of unequal scrutiny, where individuals report being targeted based on their identity, background, or perceived beliefs, adds a deeply concerning layer of potential discrimination, even in the absence of official policies condoning it. Academic institutions, represented by bodies like KUT, have issued rare travel warnings, reflecting concerns about the safety and dignity of their members, particularly those from marginalized groups. This has led to a noticeable, albeit quiet, pullback in travel, impacting not only individual plans, but also the economies of U.S. border communities and potentially chilling cross-border academic and cultural exchange. Compounding these issues is the troubling phenomenon of apparently permanent flagging, where an initial negative encounter at the border can lead to persistent, unexplained scrutiny on all future crossings, trapping individuals in a cycle of anxiety with little transparency or recourse. The cumulative effect of these developments is significant. The automatic, unquestioned welcome Canadians once felt is fading, replaced by apprehension and a need for caution. The border, for many, no longer feels like a simple line between neighbors, but a checkpoint imbued with potential complications and intrusions. The real question emerging from these trends is fundamental. Are Canadians still truly welcome in the U.S. in the way they once were, or has the relationship fundamentally changed at the border level? The evidence suggests a complex and evolving reality, where the ease and trust of the past are being replaced by a more guarded and scrutinizing approach. If you've personally experienced any of these shifts while crossing the border, we encourage you to share your story respectfully in the comments below. Your experiences add valuable perspective to this important conversation. And if this video provided insight into the current situation at the border, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more updates on issues affecting Canadians and global affairs. Stay informed, stay prepared, and thank you for watching.